Hey, it's Mike Kearney.
And Deb Golden,
hosts of the Resilient Podcast.
You've been hearing a lot about the COVID crisis with Mike, and that's not going to change.
But we recognize you may also be looking for insights that can help you make decisions and take action as we emerge from the crisis.
As we come together to meet the challenges and embrace the opportunities crisis brings, we're going to be bringing more resilient content you've come to expect from us.
You'll still get the unfiltered leadership insights you've come to rely on from Resilient. Whether you're a new listener in the Confronting the COVID-19 series, or you've been with us from the beginning.
We hope you enjoy this episode on cyber topics. After all, cyber's everywhere.
When people talk about cyber risks, so much comes to mind. Digital identity, the cloud, Internet of Things, securing data, DevSecOps, regulatory requirements, the lists go on and on. But the challenge many often forget is the people component of cyber. Believe it or not, we are the biggest risk. As we've seen all too many times in the news, all it takes is one click or one small misstep to put an entire organization at risk. So what does it take to arm your organization from the leadership level down with the tools to protect your crown jewels? How can organizations minimize the people risk? Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte's Advisory's Cyber Risk Services practice. Today, I'm with Teresa Tonthat, Assistant Vice President of IT and CISO for Texas Children's. Teresa is an incredible leader tackling cyber in such a complicated industry. In our conversation, she sheds light onto the challenge of creating security awareness through an organization and how important it is to balance cybersecurity.
No matter what, we have to take care of our core, right? And when I talk about my core, that's really like IT projects on IT. So think about the house and the foundation is that if we don't have availability, reliability, and security of our house, and we keep on putting these new business requirements and applications on top of it, it's not going to meet the objectives of the organization because it could go down.
As she puts it, she's always on her toes, both at home with ballet and in the world of cyber. I think you'll also find it inspiring how involved her leadership team is in their cybersecurity program and how Teresa is working to elevate her team in cyber throughout the organization, both within the business and within technology. I have so much respect for Teresa and her leadership style. She really cares about her people and relationships and is focused on creating an open and transparent security organization. I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you. Tune in now for my conversation with Teresa Tonthat. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Resilient Podcast. I'm Deborah Golden, and I'm pleased to have Teresa Tonthat, Assistant Vice President of IT and CISO at Texas Children's, here with me today. Hi, Teresa. How are you doing today?
Hi, Deb. I'm doing great. Thank you. How about yourself?
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm really excited to have yet another conversation with an individual like yourself who's got such great, I hear, background that you've been practicing ballet for over 15 years.
Oh, yes. I started ballet when I was in elementary school. So that's just something that I've always loved and have passion for. So it's definitely made me into a different person since then. But yeah, it's something that I've always enjoyed.
I am always intrigued to understand people's backgrounds and I think we're always so busy with work to stop and ask the question of, what else do you do? And so I think it's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it definitely, we are always on our toes in ballet, but then it doesn't change differently coming into the security world either. We're always on our toes.
That is amazing. I think you're also always on your toes. If I understand correctly, you are the proud mother of 3 children, 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, that's correct. I have Emma, Jacob, and Sydney. They're all within 15 to 19 months of each other, and they definitely keep my husband and I busy outside of work and at all times.
I can only imagine. So thank you for sharing with that. And I certainly, it seems like I love your slogan, always on our toes, with ballet, with cyber, and with your children, and probably with your husband as well. So that sounds great.
Right. I have my parents to thank for putting me through 15 years of that. Got me ready.
No, and that's a great segue into, some of the first questions that I'd like to talk with you about is really the kind of the science behind people work and how you pull together relationships and increase performance. And obviously, from Deloitte's perspective, we use something called business chemistry, and I've heard you've taken business chemistry. And so I'm curious if there's anything from that process, or as you think about, beyond, obviously not just cyber, but how we kind of think of ourselves and the chemistry that we bring to the table and use that towards building relationships.
Right. I definitely think to be successful in a security leader role in any industry, not just the healthcare, is not just having experience of running the cyber discipline, but really the soft skills and competencies across, up and down the organization. And that influence comes easier as you start building the business relationships with the right stakeholders within the organization. It's also key not to just build relationships within the organization, but build your networks outside of the organization that you're currently working too. I find myself in situations where it's so helpful for me to ping my colleagues and peers outside of Texas Children's at any time I need, regardless of the industry, having reference calls with them around new technologies that my team is looking into and wanting to purchase, and not just technically from books and articles, but hearing real life feedback from your peers is instrumental as a security leader in today's world.
And I think as you think about business chemistry, and I did hear from the team, I believe you're a pioneer and a driver. So for our listeners, that would be someone who's an energetic idea generator to think outside the box, if you will, and then a driver who loves logic and being direct and decisive. How has the combination of those two, helped you both in understanding it about yourself, but then to your point, it kind of how do you use that to your advantage, but also, dealing with sometimes perhaps tough situations?
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't done that assessment with Deloitte for over a year, but I would still say that it holds the current role. I think it's important to have a balance as a security leader, being very focused on delivery and getting capabilities in place to secure the organization, but you also have to save about that 30% to look forward. Right? Not necessarily pie in the sky type ideas, but ideas and opportunities for us to do things better, smarter, and cheaper and faster, right? And that pioneer spirit that I have, and I hope to continue to increase my percentage of my day, I guess, being a pioneer, is to start really thinking ahead, right? It depends on the industry that you're into. Some industries are more ahead than others from a cybersecurity maturity level. With healthcare, we started a little bit late, in my opinion. Since I've joined Texas Children's and reading all of the articles, it surprised me that in 2017, there was over 350 reported breaches in healthcare alone. But yet, my peers in the healthcare, some of them have taken that leap forward and start improving their maturity, but some of them are struggling because they could be nonprofit or may not have the right level of support from the board top down to start investing and secure that patient records or intellectual property such as research information. So I think it definitely depends on, organizations within healthcare, but then outside industries as well, is that you do need to have that good balance of delivery and task-oriented, but then also think visionary and pioneer as well, because technology is moving faster than we can keep up with. So, and then the threat actors are moving faster and getting more sophisticated as well. So we do need to always think forward.
Absolutely, and I love the combination of pioneer and driver, just in not only the combination in itself, because there's so many different combinations when we think about all the different types of business chemistry, but how you use it to help solve some of those complicated challenges, and the need to think sometimes outside the box, while at the same time, because we've got such an advanced adversary, if you will, to have a very kind of driver mindset to get things executed at the same time. So I think having that mix, sometimes maybe it's challenging because one's pulling on you more than the other, but it's definitely a good way to address both of the capabilities and the capacities to need to, I guess, deliver in today's world, but also think about tomorrow so that we can be thinking ahead to try and advance, our both our personal and professional, candidly, attitude towards cyber, and obviously some of the candidates or adversaries you've referenced as well, and the speed with which they're growing.
Yeah, and I would agree that type of philosophy and thought process has to be very clearly understood by the board as well, right? There's always going to have to be a change in the way we address the new threats that are coming our way, right? So I think that's one thing that I pay close attention to every time I go to the board to talk, which is about 2 to 3 times a year. The threat landscape will change, the attack vectors will change, the sophistication level is increasing. So we as an organization have to be nimble and adaptive as well.
And so I'm going to pick on the nimble and adaptive because I could not agree with you more on that. And so is there something that you think, I'm always intrigued when I think about people's backgrounds and whether that's, from childhood to college to your current role, it's clear in just listening to you as well, you've got an interest in kind of the overlay of technology, IT, cyber, but also obviously the business savvy board level as you think about the complexities. And I do truly believe cyber is everywhere. So when we think about how we have to communicate it, educate, speak it, evolve it, it really is at all these layers. Is there anything specific that you could think of that led you to this path? I don't know about you. I mean, I was always intrigued by shiny objects and widgets. And so I think if you think about kind of what got you on this path, because there's also plenty of times people are like, I had no clue. I had no idea what my path was going to be. So is there anything that kind of triggered you to get down this route?
Oh, that's a interesting question. So my background is actually in management information systems, but I started my career in the internal audit domain and, quite frankly, doing financial and business process auditing, and traveled the world. And then I had an opportunity to go back to school and get my master's. And I really think that my destiny and my career was molded by the relationships and the mentors I had in my previous organization. I feel strongly that I wouldn't have the opportunity to be where I am today if it wasn't for one of my mentors coming in to run the audit program and giving me an opportunity to move over to information technology completely. And that didn't happen until like 2008, so about 11 years in my career. And when I had that opportunity, I went over to IT to pretty much run and help start the information security organization with this executive leader. And I just fell in love with it. I started traditionally with your identity access management, and then I continued to grow my scope with threat and vulnerability management, security engineering operations, and then finally had the opportunity to run incident response. And I think just being in an organization that allows you to grow like that, but then also the world of cybersecurity is just very exciting, and it ties to business risk, right? And it's not just cyber risk, it's really, okay, so if there was a cyber threat, what do we care about it? Well, it's going to impact the ability to provide care to our patients. It's going to impact the ability for our physicians to diagnose illnesses correctly, for instance, or it just takes down an entire network, and then we have to turn sick kids and sick women away from our hospital because we can't admit them into our emergency rooms. So I think it's so impactful to the organization, and I feel that anyone in the cybersecurity space can definitely add value to the business mission of an organization, which is why I'm super passionate about it and thankful for the opportunity to come into the cybersecurity domain.
So in that story, we have something familiar that neither one of us probably knew about until I heard your answer, which was I too, for a very, very short period of time, though, was in internal audit. And actually, my first client was to do apartment vacancies. So I also got to travel the globe to literally do apartment vacancy auditing. And I realized that this might not be what I want to do. But that being said, I then did internal audit for financials and accounts payable and other types of things. And so tidbit that I did not know about you. So we share that in common. So exciting to see how your world and mine has changed along the pivots in your career, going from audit to IT, and then also industry, from oil to life sciences, healthcare. And so with these transitions, what do you think has been your biggest challenge? It's great to have heard the opportunities you've had and the mentor relationships to help get you along the way. But what would you think is, for people listening who obviously maybe are thinking of pivoting and maybe they're worried about challenges? And so what do you think has been maybe a challenge that you've been able to overcome and particularly help to build credibility as you've made these pivots?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say moving into IT has definitely allowed me to grow, right? And growing not necessarily just professionally, but growing personally and learning to balance your work or manage your work with your personal life. I wouldn't say a challenge, but an opportunity for me to think differently on how to approach that most effectively. And then also, one of the challenges that I've faced moving into my new role at Texas Children's about almost 2 years ago was that when you become an executive in an organization, you're no longer an executive over IT security. You're an executive from an administration standpoint, right? So you need to stop thinking about your silo and your area completely, and you need to think about what's best for the organization. And I don't say that as it's a challenge, but I think that it's very eye-opening and is an aha moment for me in my career path. Is when I got promoted into an executive role, I was still coming in thinking I'm going to do even better that I can. My teams will support me to do better in information security, in risk, and now in infrastructure. But really, in my new role, it's not just thinking about IT. Right? You got to have that insights around nursing, around physicians, around care coordination, around all the aspects that make the hospital operate. And cybersecurity and IT is one component to help those initiatives and those strategic initiatives happen for the organization. And I think it's a great opportunity. But if I ask myself, 5 or 10 years ago, I was not expecting that opportunity or that responsibility as an executive over IT, because you're no longer an executive over IT, you're an executive for the organization, and IT happens to be your, subject matter expert.
I love the way you put that. And I think as you even look at the breadth of what you have, to your point, over business or with business, it's everything from biomed and infrastructure and cyber, but it really is basically mission critical types of activity. And so how do you help, or how do you come up with what your priorities are, knowing obviously Texas Children's has got quite a big, vast, if you will, consumer or audience in terms of what their mission is? How do you prioritize the things that you are responsible for in support of the business?
Yes. So one thing that I will say is I think there's so many great minds within our institution, always thinking forward in digital, even from our physicians, and on how they can provide better care to our patients with data, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So they have great ideas, and I love hearing that non-IT individuals and organizations are thinking digital. Right, so that's a plus, definitely. But that also results in high demands for our teams to be able to support their objectives in a timely manner. So one of the things that I do quite frequently with my team is we have weekly, I call them town halls because everyone is involved in these meetings, and talk about their prioritization and the work that's on their plate. And we have a very strong process to help prioritize that work. And a lot of times, it depends on what level you are in the organization. We typically do not say no, right? We're a yes organization for sure. And I think that's great because, if a physician comes to you and say, hey, we need this shiny object to do data analytics to predict when the next child will have Class B infections, right? How can you say no? Like that's something you want to help. So what we have started here at Texas Children's is we have a business engagement management meeting that happens every month. And every executive and director of the specific units come and talk to IT around their business needs. Right? Instead of just coming, I need a solution, I need that technology that I just saw at the conference. I have a business need. And our job is to understand that business need and see what we have in our portfolio to support them. Because ideally, if we already have it, they should adopt that technology so that it doesn't go through the whole contracts and security review process. It's streamlined for them. When there is this unique need that we have not been able to provide to the organization, if it meets one of our 3 strategic initiatives for the organization, we definitely prioritize that. But if it doesn't, then we would say maybe we have this amount of work, right? And we need to focus on that, but we can put this in the queue for next quarter, and then we'll reassess. And so that's kind of the process we do for prioritization. But I do want to mention that no matter what, we have to take care of our core. Right. And when I talk about my core, that's really like IT projects on IT. So think about the house and the foundation is that if we don't have availability, reliability, and security of our house, and we keep on putting these new business requirements and applications on top of it, it's not going to meet the objectives of the organization because it could go down, right? It could be, there could be cyber attacks on the application, and that's no good for the entire organization. So I've always told the business and my team is like, I will protect and we will protect our core. And that means we need to have at least 30 to 40% of our focus in our entire organization on making sure we secure our and we keep our systems highly available and redundant, and then we can do disaster recovery. So that takes precedence for our team's priority, and everything net new will be, can we handle it or not, and have that negotiation with the business. And there's sometimes those conversations could be a little bit, they're healthy conversations, but at the end of the day, we're able to provide them the feedback of what our priorities are from IT standpoint, and that we have a portion of our time to think about innovation and help them get to that next big thing. But they need to work with us and understand why we're focusing 30% on our core, right? Because we have to keep it stable. If not, it's going to impact their day-to-day operations.
Yeah, and so interesting, and I love the protect the core, and the first part of that commentary where you were talking about having kind of the business drive some of the thinking, because obviously you want the business to be able to drive that innovation, and then clearly you and your team need to help figure out the how to do that,
right.
How we enable it, how we make sure it's secure. And so I'm curious, how do you work through stakeholder buy-in? Because sometimes, maybe oftentimes, those two things don't necessarily align, and so sometimes we're caught between what the business wants and what perhaps IT or cyber would better want in terms of how to protect that. And so I often find sometimes there's a difficult correlation between the two of those as we think about key stakeholders. So maybe any tricks of the trade or keys you could talk about when you think about how do you create that culture to help be more both, I guess, relationship driven, but also really how do you help the stakeholders understand cyber and vice versa? How can your cyber professionals and people in your organization understand the business?
Okay. I can start first of initiatives we do to ensure my cyber team understands the business and empathizes with the business needs as well. We have rounding opportunities where I know my managers have reached out to the nurse practitioners and asking if our teams can follow them for 1 hour in the morning to understand their operations and what they do day to day, right? And see the patients too. And the main takeaway that the team gets from that is having that conversation with the clinicians to understand what's going well for them from a technology standpoint and what's not. And then an opportunity to start kind of planting the seed with the clinicians on new cyber initiatives that we have that we know may have an impact on their workflow and their operations, but start trying to advocate and kind of sell and pitch why it's important. On the flip side, we definitely have a lot of training awareness and simulations to the organization as a whole. When I first started at Texas Children's, and just knowing the number of breaches we had in healthcare, we started doing executive summaries on every healthcare breach that we felt was significant. And we did kind of like a risk statement and how the threats came into that organization. And then we have an area that we talk about is called what's in it for Texas Children's? What's our risk profile? And then we highlight, hey, are we susceptible to this type of attack? What measures have we put in place to mitigate this attack? And what are the action plans? And we send that to our CEO and all of the executive VPs and ask all of our directors to send that out to all of their workforce members. So that provides our organization some insights on the craziness that's happening outside of Texas Children's and how often it's happening, but what our information security team is doing to help reduce the likelihood of that happening here. But we definitely always say that human factor is our weakest link, right? We talk about phishing, we talk about business email compromise. And when there is a true event of that happening, we take the screenshot of that email, we plaster it on a global communication, and we send it out and say, be aware. Like, we never miss a crisis mode. We take advantage of every crisis that we have, right? And then that's learning too. It's like, hey, this just happened. Like, it may be really bad for that person that got phished or fell for a simulation, but let's use this example, sanitize it, of course, and let everyone know what's happening in our environment. And did our technology stack stop it? Yes or no, right? So I think it's just ongoing transparency to the organization is key. We do phishing simulation to everyone, including our board members. Every person in the organization, including our CEO and our board member that has an identity at Texas Children, gets phished every month as part of our simulation. And we share the stats back to all of our leadership and ask them to help drive down the click rate. And I was actually funny. I was in a panel recently and they were asking me how are we able to get our click rate down? We started at 18% in the beginning when I joined, and the last phishing simulation went down to 2.5% click rate.
Wow.
So we were so happy. We started putting the simulation click rates into our performance reviews for IT. So
yeah,
IT
and I was going to ask
first.
that. Yeah, I was going to ask if you tie that into performance, or, I think one of the challenges we often hear about is how do you balance, cybersecurity needs and education with, I call it the glassy-eyed effect. I think people are like, oh, it's another cyber thing, or, oh, there's somebody else clicked a button. And so how do you put that accountability and responsibility on both the individual, right? So whether that's an internal physician, whether that's an internal technician, the internal facing, people of Texas Children, but then also, the external piece of that. So it's interesting to hear the tie back to performance, because we often hear, is that a good way or trigger to help manage accountability when it comes to cyber incidents?
Yeah, and in my previous organizations, we were not able to do our simulation monthly for sure. I don't think it was very beneficial, but here we had 100% support to hit every individual, whether it's contractors, vendors, or employees, or physicians. It's interesting is when we first provided the statistics to our risk committee, the executives at Texas Children's immediately said, just turn off their access. But they had no tolerance for it at all. Like, we had a repeat offender that clicked 5 to 7 times, right? And they're like, just yank the access. And we're like, okay, wait, let's start with an accountability plan, right? Let's start highlighting these statistics. And that one person that clicked 7 times will stop clicking after we share this accountability plan. And sure enough, that person did. But I think also because we're a hospital institution, I know there's some companies out there that says you can't have internet access, for instance, or no email access, or you just don't get network access. Well, if you're a physician coming in and you may have clicked on a link a few times and now you can't log into your EMR to chart a patient, that's probably not going to go over well. But still, again, a balance, right? So we didn't have to network access, but it dropped from 18 to 2%. And that was all because transparency and awareness to the leadership team and put them on the hook to making sure that their direct reports were not clicking on those links and took the training to get educated. Sometimes it's just this awareness and the human factor just to even help drive down the click rate, right? You don't have to be punitive all times to get to have a shift, I guess, from a behavior standpoint.
No, I love it, and I love the human factor aspect on it. And so on that note, it's really interesting, and obviously given the background that you bring, as well as obviously your organization, what kinds of challenges, when you think of the future of health, and I kind of sometimes think back and I'm like, well, we've had the future of health for a while, right? The advancements in health and in industry has been amazing. When you think about where technology is, right? I could swallow a pill and see the entire inside of my body, or, just even in terms of the capabilities of technology inside hospital systems. When you think about all of that, when we look at the quote unquote Internet of Things or how different types of medical devices work, what do you think is a different way that we're going to have to start thinking about kind of cyber within the future of health, and whether that's virtual care or whether that's the connected medical devices, as I was talking about? But now all of a sudden, not only are we talking about, like you were talking about, the internal individuals who are in your organization working, we're talking about obviously the consumer here that is taking on the data and or at your services, but also kind of data is going to be everywhere, because it's going to be in not only the medicine that they're being provided, but also the analytics that are being performed on the kind of system and the history, if you will, of patient care. Where do you think cyber really has to go?
So I think cyber has to follow the data at all times, because our perimeters are coming down. There's so much software as a service contracts going on, especially in healthcare, because most healthcare institutions do not have an application development shop. They buy applications off the shelf, or they lean towards SaaS solutions. So that is a concern. We're very cautious at Texas Children's of moving off premises, but we know that it's going to, we're going to have to get there, right? So for example, although we purchased our Microsoft Azure subscription last year, when I joined Texas Children's and we started looking at that environment, we wanted to make sure that it was operationally ready to start consuming workloads. We wanted to make sure that our teams were appropriately trained to run and operate and secure cloud. It's different, right? A lot of people say infrastructure as a service is an extension of your data center. Well, it is to an extent, but the way you update the networks, the way you provide security service and have visibility, and the way you spin up virtual environments is different than you may do it in your data center. And a lot of the roles and responsibilities gets a little bit cloudy too, right? It may not be a like for like. So we intentionally paused our journey to Azure, to cloud, earlier this year, because we knew that we weren't ready for it. So I think organizations probably need to kind of sit back and think, just because everyone's going that way, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the right people, processes in place to fully support the cloud, which is where all this huge data lakes want to reside, right? Because you want high compute and you want easy access, and you don't want to have to save the data all the time, because you may just need to turn it up for a quick research project and turn it back down. So I would say we're moving cautiously into the cloud as it relates to big data. And at this point, our journey, we've hired a third party to come in to start setting up our first, we call it our most viable cloud component, so that let's start small and then we can crawl, walk, and run, to that maturity level. So we're more on the low risk tolerance side on that for now.
Yeah, and I think you share, while many people may not articulate it in terms of the uncertainty, it certainly is, at the end of the day, I think things are just ebbing and flowing at such a high pace. And by that way, I mean, not just the technology, but how do we address it? And to the earlier point, how do we think about how the adversary is addressing it, right? So there's lots of different mechanics that you need to think about when you're looking at, is it just quote unquote as simple as migrating to the cloud, or what are all the other nuances that you can make sure you're tying this to the data, to your point, as the perimeter gets expanded. So I think all valuable steps as you look at how do you get there, wherever there may be, and then how do you look at that from a stepped maturity level, which I think is pretty pragmatic in terms of that approach. So it's good to hear, particularly as you look at, being and creating the risk profile that's appropriate for your organization. I'm going to shift a little bit into what I think is my favorite part of the podcast, which is our quick fire or rapid fire questions. And so whatever comes to your mind, it could be a sentence, a word, a whole paragraph. It's whatever comes to your mind first when you hear some of these questions. And so I'll start off first. What would you describe as your brand as a leader, or how would people describe you if you think about your brand?
That's a good question. I think I would probably be described as someone that likes to collaborate and partner, right? Whether that's with the outside business or even within internal IT. But I also think that they would feel that I'm pretty assertive. We will collaborate and we will engage for understanding and awareness, but most of the time, those discussions probably would have already been had throughout the leadership teams by the time it comes to me.
Well, those are all amazing aspects of being a leader, right? Collaboration and partnering and being willing to listen and hear. I think those are all incredibly great attributes when you think about leading an organization in some very sticky places. And again, I think sometimes it's really difficult to be able to even articulate what cyber is. And it's not because you're not intelligent or the environment around it. It's just moving at such a quick pace that what you say today could be gone tomorrow or changed tomorrow. So the ability to collaborate and partner is key. So people aren't always turning around being like, well, that was different yesterday, or it's different than tomorrow, or why didn't you tell me tomorrow what you didn't already know? So I think having some of those core characteristics in place helps to not necessarily set the guidelines or the parameters, but to really just have more of a kind of a relationship in place. Like I said, between the business, IT, internal, external, it seems like that relationship becomes even more critical when we're talking about things in ambiguity.
Definitely.
So speaking of which, it sounds like based on our conversation, and you hit on it in the beginning around the mentors and how you got to where you got to, how do you kind of pay it forward from that perspective? What do you think about when you mentor other people, or what do you think is critical for people who want to be a mentor and maybe aren't really sure what to do or the benefit of having a mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely encourage everyone that wants to excel in their career, and even sometimes in your personal life, to have a mentor. It doesn't always have to be business related. But I feel, based on my experience, had I not had my mentors, and I have more than one mentor, I wouldn't be where I am today. And the mentors really should help shape and give you guidance on how to move forward in your career and your corporate path. I love being mentors as well. I mean, it's interesting. There's individuals that come to me and ask for advice that are not even part of my team or are even part of IT, right? And I feel very humbled when they do that. And I am very transparent as well. Whatever they ask me, I'll let them know kind of how to navigate through those challenges. That's worked for me. But then I have encouraged them to also seek out additional individuals that I know within the organization that can help mentor them as well. So I think that's part of my philosophy of mentorship is have more than one, right? And have more than one with different skill sets, right? So, and be selective of who you pick as your mentor as well. Because usually you want to pick a mentor that you respect the way they lead, respect the leadership style. So finding that could be difficult at some times, but when you do, stay connected. It doesn't matter what organization you leave to or the different roles you have, continue to make an effort to stay connected with that person.
I love it. I'm literally taking notes as we're talking as well. So I love all the commentary on mentorship, and I too believe that is to be critical. I think one thing that I would only add is that sometimes I feel like people will be like, well, this person isn't entirely what I would want. And so I would always suggest, if there is something that you love about them, like you said, the leadership style that they enumerate that you would like to have, maybe that's the one piece you want the mentorship on. There might be other things that they do that you're kind of like, or maybe not my style. But if there are definitely things that you aspire to be, or you aspire from that person, that's some way that they handled a situation, right? It doesn't have to be the 100% of the 100%, but perhaps in the moment, in a situation, you learn something from that individual. It'd be a great way to seek mentorship, how to potentially even just deal with situations that you might not otherwise be ready for.
Exactly. And you're right. It could just be one situation where you saw that person handled so well, right? And you're like, how did you do that? And then you start building that relationship, and more than likely they'll have more use cases and scenarios where they can help you develop yourself as well.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree with you more. Is there any leaders you admire or aspire to be? Speaking of which.
Yeah, I actually have two leaders, which are my two mentors right now. And one is already retired, and his name is David Frazier. And he was at my previous company, Halliburton. And he was actually the executive that got me to come over to IT, and that promoted me within the IT organization to the security role before I left for Texas Children's. And he retired, and he's living in New York, Manhattan with his wife, and we still connect through text messaging and phone calls every now and then just to see how each other are doing. And sometimes I'll bug him about some challenges that I'm having, and he's so insightful. He's so insightful, and everything he tells me is very positive and gives me really good examples. So I'm very fortunate to have him as a mentor. I also, it's interesting. My boss, I feel, is also my mentor. Her name's Myra Davis, and I've only known her for less than 2 years, but man, she's really good at giving coaching. I tell her that every day. I was like, you make me grow. but I love it. It's because she's been at Texas Children's for 17 years. It is a different industry, right? It's all about relationship building, networking, and influence. And this is where I've learned most of those competencies since joining Texas Children's. She is stellar at coaching and developing her leaders and her executive leaders. And I would never be shy to come ask her, hey, it's like, how do you handle this situation? And she would be very straightforward in giving me advice. But at the end of the day, she knows it's up to me how I handle it, because each leader has a different style. But she would give me insights of what works and what doesn't, based on her past experience here, which helps me a lot.
Yeah, no, I've got some as well. I love your texting. I was actually doing it with one individual yesterday. That's a mentor of mine. I was just like, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Because I could really use your thinking right now. And sometimes it's just to bounce ideas off of, and or say, hey, does this sound crazy? And if it's crazy, trusting in the person who's telling you that maybe that's the right thing or maybe that's not the right thing. So I just had that literally yesterday. Did the exact same thing with someone who's one of my mentors. So I'm happy to hear that. And I have one last question to kind of wrap up this interview. It's been amazing to chat with you and hear about your insights. One of the things I ask is not, what is success or what is failure for you, but what is, if you're like, wow, I can't wait to do this. Like, what's your next, I can't wait to do, personally or professionally, cyber, non-cyber, what are you really looking forward to?
Well, what I look forward to, I can't wait to do is really start developing and growing my new team. Right now, with the cyber and infrastructure and biomed hat on, I think it's a great opportunity for me to build the team up and drop some of the silos and the walls that's been in place for centuries and years in most organizations between infrastructure, IoT, OT, IT, and cybersecurity. And I'm starting to see already the leaders under my area working very well together, and it's phenomenal. I'm super excited, and I want to see that continue. And as I bring in new directors and senior leaders to help shape the organization and tear down some of these silos, so that we all can do our jobs more effectively and efficiently. And our goal, and I know I mentioned to you before, was we call it ARS, which is availability, reliability, and security. I mean, this is the best organization structure to have to provide ARS back to our organization, right? And then it's a good way too for me to learn as an executive leader, how do I balance security with business reward, right? I think coming from a security standpoint, we're always wanting to put in new capabilities, lock things down so that we can safeguard the information, knowing that that could impact someone's day-to-day work style and work methods. So where's that balance? And then, as you introduce new technologies into your organization, it increases the complexity of your data centers, right? So that eventually could impact availability as well. So what is enough, right? And how do we invest in layers of defense? And do we invest more in monitoring and detection versus preventive? So those are some decisions that I look to my directors and my senior leaders to help work together and partner on that so that we come to our common goal for the mission.
Well, I can't wait to keep in contact with you to see how those decisions roll out in the near future. It sounds like there's definitely a lot on the horizon, obviously not just for you and the evolution that you'll be having at Texas Children's, but obviously as just the healthcare industry continues to evolve. And so I certainly appreciate your time today. And I look forward to, again, like I said, just keeping in contact because I think there's going to be a lot of great things on the horizon for you and for Texas Children. So thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Deb. Appreciate it.
What an amazing conversation with Teresa. I'm not sure about you, but I can't wait to hear from her more, hopefully in the next couple of months as we think about all the strategic decisions that she's looking to make, whether that's how to bring cyber into the future of health as the health environment continues to evolve, or it's how to follow data, in her words, to expand beyond the perimeter of the traditional organization. I think when you hear from Teresa's stories and you think about where she's taking health, the future of health and cyber, it truly is inspirational. After all, she's always on her toes. If you like what you've heard, stay tuned for more discussions with other cyber leaders and to hear from some new hosts as we expand the podcast to also feature chief audit executives, chief risk officers, and other individuals. Check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at Deloitte.com/US Resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. Thanks so much for listening.